Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted. And here we are with the Second Doctor and Leela, a group hug, smash face, and force draw deck that comes to us as one of our donation decks of the week from Montusker. They say, fundamentally, I assume this deck is locked to power level 6 tables and maybe 7 without infinites. But I recently changed it a ton to add more interaction and protection, and removed Horn of Greed and Font of Mythos in favor of cards that draw my opponent's cards on my turn. Ultimately, I also tried to run Assault Suit, but the only game I got it off was in a 3-player game, and they just didn't attack with it, lol. But I guess I kind of want your opinion on the deck. Is it just cursed? Is it just cursed to be more for lower power tables? They add I Do Despise for those 4-hour games, and this ends the game fast without just winning due to power level difference. Or can Leela, despite no innate protection or useful keywords, win through getting big and smack people for lethal commander damage? The easiest way to do that is the Wheel of Unblockable currently, but that only kills one person. Thank you so much, Montusker. And yeah, there's a lot to think about and a lot to talk about. I think that's somewhat, can Leela win that way is answers itself. But after we go through the commanders, let's talk a little bit about Group Hug and what Group Hug is in Commander and what it can and cannot do. Because the deck is close to kind of finding out what that means, but not in a positive way. So let's see what we can do to help. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is our Doctor and companion to the deck, and why are they here? The Second Doctor is a 4-mana Azorius 2/4, that's white-blue, Time Lord Doctor. They have 2 abilities. 1, players have no maximum hand size, and 2, at the beginning of your end step, each player may draw a card. Each opponent who does can't attack you or permanents you control during their next turn. Very simple kind of politics kind of commander that trades cards to your opponents to protect yourself from attacks. But since we are in Group Hug, we also want to be giving those cards, and of course we are a player, so we get a card as well. Our companion is Leela, Sevatim Warrior, a green 4-mana 3/3 human warrior that says whenever an opponent draws a card except for the first one they draw each of their draw steps, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Leela is impressive if you can drop a wheel, or over time she will grow incredibly big, incredibly fast, and most likely will be attacking for that kind of sweet spot of either 11 or 21 damage, making her either a 1-hit or 2-hit creature. But as our deck builder, points out, Leela does not have any combat evasion or combat abilities. She is just a big beater, which can make it kind of tricky to break through. Looking at the deck itself, I do really like the way it functions, though it kind of exists in this sort of limbo space where it's trying to do 3 things at once. There is the Group Hug aspect. We're using cards like our Commander, Howling Mine, Dictate of Kurifix, our creature of Kami of Crescent Moon, these cards that are going to support the entire table and draw them a bunch of cards. Then we have cards that are meant to support or work with Leela, from things like Hardened Scales and Wizard Class to other versions of these kind of cards such as Mordenkainen, I honestly cannot pronounce that, or Duggan Private Detective, which are creatures that grow and do this kind of beatdown plan. And finally, we have a very good kind of protection collection of interaction to keep our opponents down, interact with them, and make sure we are getting ahead. This isn't even adding to the fact that our deck builder has mentioned that they are considering making this deck into a humans deck. I can't help with that right now. The deck itself is not a humans deck. If you'd like me to build this as a human deck, you can send me an email and we can talk about it, but this as it is, it's not a humans deck, so we're not going to worry too much about it. However, I think the idea is kind of clear. We're trying to do a lot, and what we're doing is not really perfectly working. Before we have the group hug conversation, let's do the thing we always do. We have 35 lands, and in a deck that is drawing a lot of cards and enabling a bunch of cards and enabling a bunch of extra land drops, I wouldn't mind us to go up to 37, probably 38 lands. Things like, you know, our mana rocks are probably a little less important, like Arcane Signet, Thought Vessel, even Sword of War and Peace, even though it's on theme, but we'll get to that. Or Sonic Screwdriver, but once again, we might get back to that again. Otherwise, I don't think we need that many mana rocks, and I'd rather just have more lands that I can drop into play. When it comes to our curve is pretty nice. I do like it. Our commanders are both 4-drops, but our 4-drop section is pretty small, and considering the kind of deck that we want to do, you know, it makes sense that we'll be casting our commanders first. Now, there's also a bunch of cards that I think are generally just mismatched power level. Trigon Predator, for example, is way too power level for what this deck is trying to do. Abzan Battle Priest is just a little too cute. Getting a bunch of lifelink on your smashy thing is not the same as giving it trample, which I believe Duskshell Crawler does for 2 mana, which is much better. Likewise, something like Trusty Retriever as well is just kind of cute. So there is a bit of power level discrepancy. Like we're playing Carpet of Flowers, Burgeoning, we're playing a bunch of really good ramp, but we are also playing the Trusty Retriever. So there might be a moment to go through this and cut things that don't really work, but it's about that time that we have the group hug conversation. So what is Group Hug and why does it have a reputation? Group Hug is the mechanics of having cards that generally, unanimously, what's the word? Symmetrically. Cards that symmetrically help the table by giving them traditionally mana or card draw, either directly as in lands on the battlefield, or treasures, or card draw as in cards in hand, or cards they can cast from exile. There's a pretty wide net of cards that do this, but the general other side of Group Hug that isn't talked about is, well, there is a part that's talked about, which is that there is this assumption of a political motive where your opponents leave you alone because you are the ones drawing them the cards. And I think we'll get back to that because I don't think it's very fair, but I think the real part that's not talked about is the idea that you are giving all of this card advantage so that your card advantage, which is nominal, is a little hidden, right? Those two things may sound similar but not the same. One is kind of expecting favors, and the other one is that people don't notice that you're playing an extra land, that you're dropping 2 lands every turn and drawing 2 extra cards each turn if they are all doing it. And that is the power of Group Hug. It is the ability to remain under the radar while accelerating for a very, very quick win. When it comes to expecting your opponents to do what you say or not interact with you, I think this is incredibly faulty. Your opponents are going to know that you are here to play and win the game, right? This idea that the Group Hug player is just this fun-loving person that just wants to come and see everyone do their best, like a kindergarten teacher, it's just not real, right? No one comes and does this, and if they do, well, I mean, you found a unicorn, keep them in your play group, but otherwise, they know you're here to win. And you have fed them the mana and cards to not only go off quickly and also protect their combos and hold up interaction. Much like you, they probably have good interaction suites, good support, and good plans to win the game, right? So you're contending with them at the same time. So in that kind of environment, do you think only smashing face with Leela, or this being your primary plan, is a winning plan? I might be being a bit facetious, so bearing the lead. Obviously, the answer is no, but I'm not suggesting to take out Leela or these cards. I find them actually to be very, very good, because one, they are a really good backup plan that allows you to be doing something as you set up to win, and two, they're rather distracting. when you drop these creatures and you're attacking turn after turn into your opponents have something to think about and something to worry about. They're basically playing with the Abyss in play. If you're familiar, it's a world enchantment that requires players to sacrifice a creature every turn, and playing with the Abyss is slang for, they have to chump block every turn. Yes, that's not a big ask, especially when you're feeding them cards and mana, but it is something that is distracting. And while you do this, and while you put different abilities or grow Leela or make other creatures just as scary, you are setting up your combo. And this is when we're going to go into additions and we're going to talk about combo. I recognize infinite combo is something that people tend to not like, so I'm not going to suggest one of those, but it's really, really important that as a group hug player that you can end the game. I think it is fundamentally unsound to play a group hug deck without the ability to emergency switch and end the game, because otherwise you are creating a chaotic situation that you cannot control, and that's going to accelerate one of your opponents to win, which is traditionally called kingmaking. And you don't want to be kingmaking. It's not fun, it doesn't feel like you can win, and eventually you develop a reputation for it and people aren't interested in playing with that deck. So how do we alleviate that? Well, the one I want to go for is Folio of Fancies. I think this is a very reasonable, very powerful win condition that I think you can pull out of nowhere and win, while being very synergetic with your commander, obviously having the text that your commander has, and also being a mass card draw engine. It is also a mana sink, and group hug decks that have tremendous amounts of mana need a mana sink to do something with. Obviously, the main win condition will be after your opponents have 10 to 12 to more cards in hand, you're going to activate the second ability multiple times in one turn, completely milling them out. And if you have an extra activation, you are going to use this ability to then force them to draw one additional card. So it'll be for 2 mana, knocking them out of the game. So how are we going to do this? There's a few things we need to set up. Obviously, we need the Folio of Fancies. That one's pretty straightforward, but we're going to need ways to untap the Folio of Fancies repeatedly. The Screwdriver that you have is one of those ways, and the other two I want to use is Voltaic Key and Manifold Key. Oops. Both of these with the main idea that 1 mana tap, you can untap the card, but obviously Manifold Key is really, really strong with Leela and should be in there for sure. I'm just gonna double check that it's not in there. Yeah, should definitely be in there. So I like that as supporting both sides. Both of these cards and the Screwdriver, the Sonic Screwdriver, can be used in tandem to get, let's say, one by itself, and then you have 3. So like 4 triggers off of this card, which if they have upwards of 15 to 20 cards in hand, is probably going to mill them out completely. And that's not even including if you try something a little spicier, such as using this ability to draw them an extra 5 to 10 cards, going to your turn, and then using this 4 times, because that'll guarantee most likely that they're going to all be milled out. That being said, the next question quickly becomes, well, why would your opponents let you do this? Isn't that silly? And I'm inclined to agree. You've given them the mana, you've given them the cards, why wouldn't they interact? Well, this is when I'm going to suggest things that have silence effects. Kutzil and, of course, Tidal Barracuda, but Kutzil especially is very, very powerful. Something that's really nice about Kutzil is that Kutzil works really well with your main idea of your creatures, especially with +1/+1 counters, and doesn't seem that, necessarily there to just stop the combo. You might be noticing a bit of a trend. I like these cards that support your aggro plan and support the combo plan without screaming to the group you're about to win the game. Kutzil is very, very strong by themselves, but once you untap on your turn, once it's your turn, right, your opponents cannot cast spells. There is no point of interaction as soon as it starts, and then you will be given the opportunity to make the decision if you would like to try to win the game. Don't forget, there are ways your opponents can interact. There's a lot of cycling effects that do things. There's activated abilities on creatures and lands. So don't consider yourself necessarily safe, but for most stuff, this will stop it. Likewise, Tidal Barracuda, being a lot more fun, has that text right there. Your opponents can't cast spells on your turn, and the pure chaos of giving all players flash. I really like this card in this kind of build because once again, that first line seems to have a group hug significance to it. All of a sudden, all of your opponents are put into, honestly, decision paralysis where they have a bunch of mana and they are trying to decide the best way to play, and they've been all given this boon and they're trying to figure out how to use it. Whereas you really want it for this text right here. Your opponents can't cast spells during your turn, allowing you to be completely free, once again, from spells, in order to try to go off. Or, once again, this also applies to using Manifold Key on Leela and knocking a player out of the game. This card is really, really powerful. I really do like it, and I think it's very much so worth considering the fact that there is this very strange decision paralysis that this sets up. Because though it doesn't feel like it, there is a schism in the turn order. Because your three opponents... This is a weird thing, I'm going to try to explain it. When we play Magic, and we play with three opponents, we think of a turn cycle like a clock. Every time it gets back to our turn, the clock has progressed back to like noon or midnight, and we're starting another cycle. This is technically not true because there is a first player and a last player, but that doesn't really affect how we play our turns. There is that mentality of like knowing when people are going to go off and combo out or play higher like mana drops, but because Commander makes its own mana, it doesn't really last very long. So most of us tend to think of it as our turn and then like several uninterrupted like turns we have to live through to get back to our turn and do things. Maybe this is simplifying it, but something to worth it. What we might forget is our opponents all tend to think like this. And imagine if this big clock you have where it's your turn, somewhere in the other 3/4, there's this zone where you just cannot do anything, right? Now, traditionally, that's not a problem because you're not going to function at instant speed, but Tidal Barracuda sets you up to want to function on instant speed. So there becomes this really, really big question. Do you use your abilities on the turn before or the turn after the schism? And that's only thinking of the player who is opposite of you on the table. The other two have even less of a choice. If the player before you wants to do things, they're incentivized to wait for the entire turn cycle before their turn, which is not often what you want to do because you want your creatures to be blocking or attacking or doing something. Okay, I might be getting a little bit lost in the sauce. What I'm suggesting is Tidal Barracuda is incredibly powerful and much more disruptive than expected. This is the kind of card you play and you get away with this line of text because everyone is going to be fundamentally distracted. Which, if you're picking up what I'm putting down, is the core of what Group Hug is. Let's see what else I suggested. Two cards that I thought were also really, really interesting is On the Trail, a newer card that works really, really good with these kind of group hug effects. I think it's very much so built to be cute with, I don't know, clue things, but if you just ignore that and use this in a group hug deck, you're going to find yourself putting a lot of cards on the battlefield, especially once you start playing cards that allow you to draw off of your opponent's draws or things like that. You're going to ramp incredibly fast. Very, very strong. Likewise, Heartbeat of the Spring is kind of here to be, how do I put this? It's kind of a signpost for all other group hug decks, group hug cards that I feel like you're missing. I think another very good one would be Flourishing Rites, I believe, which probably should be the one here. Yeah, Rites of Flourishing. As cards that are just very, very strong and are just plain group hug cards. And if we are on the group hug side, we need a little more of this because we want these effects to be accessible to us. And yes, our opponents will get them too. I think you can run a few more of those without much trouble. Another card that I think is very, very good just alongside the aggro plan is Shabraz, the Sky Shark. This is a very, very good card while you're drawing cards, which you're going to draw quite a few, growing very quickly and also gaining life. I prefer this very much so to the Abzan creature that gives lifelink to your creatures with +1/+1 counters. Instead of playing a subpar creature, we're going to play a creature with natural evasion that grows incredibly fast and will incidentally draw us a lot of cards. This isn't even including the fact that this will give target human flying, which is our commander, Leela, give her flying, which will give us the evasion that we want. Very, very good. I think this fits really nicely. Coming to the end, there's a few things, 2 more cards I want to point out. Smothering Tide is noticeably missing from this deck. This may be a budget concern, but I would be amiss not to say Smothering Tide would be really good here. I don't think that's really a surprise. Smothering Tide tends to be good everywhere, but obviously in Group Hug, very, very good. And one other thing I just wanted to... Oh, no, I have 1 extra card. I forgot about this. If I've ever seen a deck that needs to play Forced Fruition, you should be playing this card. This is the silliest card I've ever seen, and I love it so much. I don't know what the reasonableness of playing this card is, but I will admit that this is a win condition and a very, very powerful one. Now, this definitely needs the support of either giving a bunch of interaction cards to your opponents or to yourself, which you already have, or having Tidal Barracuda already out, because that allows your opponents to squabble over spells really, really quickly, which will burn them through their decks very, very fast. But also you might just need some kind of silence effects occasionally to shut down your opponents so they don't straight up win. Barracuda would once again be a very, very good silence effect, because once you get to your turn and you have Forced Fruition out, you are probably going to win the game. The final thing I wanted to point out, and this is the actual final thing, is that our deck builder was asking about alternative companions, and I think it's just worth noting that if you wanted to do the forced draw direction a little more than the group hug version, Visler Turlo, this guy works really, really well. This is a very good forced draw punish commander, especially with the latter text of forcing your opponent to draw once again and then losing an incrementally high amount of life each time, probably going to 8, 9, 10 damage per turn. The only downside, of course, is that Visler is very, very vulnerable to dying, though your opponents most likely will not block this creature because it represents so much damage to the player that is in control of it. I absolutely do not recommend keeping this commander on your side and giving it to someone else. Those are generally my ideas. I think something that is really worth considering in a deck like this is taking away the things that feel kind of too fair. I know I briefly went over them, so I want to throw out a few more cards here. Birds of Paradise feels particularly strange because we don't have a very large amount of necessary 3-drops, and we have a lot of ramps, so I would rather this just be something else. Likewise, Noble Hierarch. Pippin seems just okay. I'm not quite sure why they're in here besides giving protection to our commander, but could be something else. Likewise, Mana Gorger Hydra and Pride Malkin works for the trample, but Mana Gorger, Hydra, and my goodness, there's one more. Well, the Hydra, that's gonna bother me forever. What is the other one that creates bodies I just saw? But the Hydra feels a little too cute. I do appreciate it gets strong, but it's just not going to be as big as our other creatures that do the same thing. And that's generally where I want to put the pressure on. Promise of Loyalty, likewise, is a card that is just a little too cute here. I would rather just have a board clear as a safety valve without, you know, having your opponents choose which creature they keep. The rest of the deck feels very, very strong, and nothing else particularly stands out. Maybe Petrify could just be removal, but I will leave that to you. I hope this was helpful. The deck looks really, really cool, and I think once you get through the group hug problem of it, I think you'll be very happy with the result, and you'll find the power of the deck will go up. Otherwise, if you are considering this to be a humans deck one day, feel free to send me an email or a message, and I'm always down to do deck creations, so we could do that for sure. That all to say, thank you so much for sending the deck, and thank you for supporting the channel. Good luck, and happy deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe. I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you, and good luck in brewing and building.